Back in 17th and 18th century China, you had this incredible collision of worlds happening. On one side, you have this foreign faith brought over by missionaries, and on the other, an ancient empire, deeply suspicious of outsiders. Well, this encounter, it led to a really dramatic and honestly brutal chapter in history. It's a story all about conviction, power, and the immense human cost of belief.
So this isn't just a history lesson. We're really digging into a pretty fundamental human question here, one that kind of frames this entire story. What is it that makes an idea, a belief, a conviction you hold so deeply, so powerful, that you'd be willing to die for it? Just keep that question in the back of your mind as we head into the province of Fukien.
All right, so our story really kicks off right here in the bustling coastal province of Fukien in southeastern China. It was here around the 1630s that this new and, for some, really disruptive idea arrived with a group of Dominican missionaries. And they had one single goal: to spread their faith right in the heart of the empire.
And for a while it worked. The mission actually took root with surprising speed. It all started in 1631, and by 1642, a key figure, a guy named Francis de Capillas, had arrived. Then, just 2 years later, in 1644, the mission entered what the source material calls its golden age. I mean, we're talking a period of incredible growth and a huge wave of conversions.
But to really get what they were walking into, you've got to understand who was in charge: the mandarins. These guys were the elite, the scholars, the officials who ran the entire imperial government. They were the gatekeepers of culture, of tradition, of law, and they looked at this new foreign influence with more than just a little suspicion. They saw it as a potential threat to their whole way of life.
And here's the irony. It was that very success, that golden age, that really planted the seeds for the conflict to come. The missionaries' growing influence wasn't seen as some great spiritual awakening by the authorities. No way. They saw it as a direct challenge to the way things were. A storm was definitely gathering on the horizon.
And this slide, this captures that tension perfectly. On one hand, you have the golden age, so lots of conversions, new communities popping up all over the place. But on the other hand, you see the real reason for the coming persecution, this deep-seated fear of foreign influence, what the source calls Mandarin hatred for all that was foreign. To the imperial elite, this new religion was just a dangerous intrusion.
Now, get this. This quote from 1720 really shows you the incredible paradox of the whole situation. The more the danger and the persecution ramped up, the stronger the conviction of the missionaries and their followers became. I mean, in their minds, suffering wasn't something to avoid. It was proof that their faith was real and their purpose was true.
Well, you know that kind of rising tension has to break eventually. And when it did, the persecution found its first major target, an individual whose death would become a powerful symbol for everything that was about to happen. And that individual was Father Francis de Capillas. The source material gives him this incredible title, the protomartyr of China. And that's a title that carries a ton of weight.
So what exactly does protomartyr mean? It means he was the first person that we have documented who was executed for his Christian faith in China. So his death wasn't just some random incident. It really marked the beginning of a whole new, much more violent phase of this cultural clash.
His final days were just brutal. He was captured in a city called Fukien, and he was tortured over and over again. Twice, he was subjected to this horrible punishment where they crushed your ankles. And his ordeal finally ended on January 15th, 1648, when he was taken out and beheaded.
One of the punishments you see mentioned a lot is the cane. You gotta understand, this wasn't just about restraining someone. It was a tool for public humiliation. You'd be locked into this heavy wooden yoke, and you were forced to wear your so-called crime for everyone to see. It was a physical and psychological torment, really designed to just break your spirit.
Okay, now let's jump forward about a century. The persecution is escalated. It's not just about individual missionaries anymore. Now, the authorities are targeting the leadership, and this all leads to the execution of a Bishop, Peter Sanz, which sent an absolute shockwave through the Christian communities there in Fukien.
See, Bishop Sanz was incredibly good at what he did. Under his leadership, the source says conversions reached an incredible height. But that very success basically painted a giant target on his back. A particularly cruel viceroy in Fukien saw him as the head of the snake, and he was determined to cut it off.
After he was captured, Bishop Sanz was thrown in prison, and he pretty much knew his fate was sealed. He spent his last 3 days just praying, getting ready for the end. Then, the final order came down from the capital. The sentence was pronounced.
On May 26, 1747, the executioners came into his cell. They led him to the execution ground, and as the source says with this, stark simplicity, with one stroke of the sword, his head was cut off.
But the story doesn't end with Bishop Sanz. See, he had been captured along with 4 of his fellow missionaries. His execution, well, that was just the beginning. The viceroy of Fukien was dead set on wiping out the mission's leadership completely.
And the fate of these 4 men really shows you just how cruel the local authorities were. The emperor had actually postponed their executions, but the viceroy, he was impatient, he was defiant, and he decided to take matters into his own hands. On October 28, 1748, he ordered Fathers Royo, Serrano, Alcaber, and Diaz to be secretly killed in their cells. They were suffocated, their bodies were burned, and their ashes were scattered. A final, brutal act to make sure their memory couldn't even be honored.
The sheer brutality of this era is just laid bare when you look at the methods they used. These weren't just executions, they were acts of terror. We're talking beheading, suffocation, public humiliation in the Kang, and agonizing torture like ankle crushing. This was the reality for anyone who refused to renounce their faith.
We focused on the leaders, the ones whose names and stories got written down. But the source material makes it really clear that for every documented martyr like Capillas or Sanz, there were countless local Christians, men and women whose names are just lost to time. And that leaves us with one last, lingering question. Whose stories does history forget?